What if I told you that everything you've ever believed about the survival of Native Americans is a complete lie? Welcome to the channel, and today we're going to shatter the main historical stereotypes. For many years, movies and textbooks have led us to believe that their customs and rituals were nothing more than simple, primitive superstitions. But get ready for a big surprise. In reality, behind those dances around the campfire lay an incredibly complex, perfectly calibrated economic system that could give modern corporations a run for their money in terms of efficiency. The tribes of the Great Plains established an incredibly rigid set of rules, where literally every step and every breath was calculated down to the smallest detail. In these harsh conditions, there was simply no room for error. A violation of even a single unwritten law and merciless nature would inevitably bring the entire camp to the brink of total annihilation. In this video, we'll break down this hidden survival system piece by piece. You'll understand why their internal laws were stricter than any modern code of conduct. And most importantly, be sure to watch this video all the way to the end. In the finale, I'll share a shocking story about how a single, seemingly insignificant transgression by an ordinary hunter could rob an entire tribe of its future and, overnight, destroy a centuries-old system of survival. You won't see anything like this in those boring documentaries. Are you ready for the shocking truth about the true laws of the Great Plains? Many people are used to thinking that the life of the Lakota tribe depended solely on luck. In reality, their way of life was governed by a strict calendar of resource consumption. The first rule categorically forbade hunting for food at the wrong time of year. This law was dictated not by mysticism, but by the cold calculation of population survival. The winter months required the use of supplies gathered in advance. Hunting during periods of deep snow drained people's strength faster than it provided any benefit. Spring was considered a time of nature's renewal and the growth of new resources. Human interference during this period could disrupt the fragile balance of an entire region. Therefore, the camp strictly controlled any movements of foragers beyond the campsite. Violating this seasonal rule meant an immediate loss of strategic advantage. If a group set out for food before the appointed time, it risked scaring away the main herds. This led to changes in the usual migration routes of the herds for years to come. A single person's wrong decision would deprive the community of its supplies for the coming winter. The economy of the plains did not forgive such miscalculations in planning. The summer period also had its own strict time and location constraints. Scout groups carefully surveyed the territory before beginning large-scale foraging. They determined the optimal time when resources could be gathered with maximum efficiency. Until that moment, no one was permitted to begin active operations. Discipline within the camp was maintained by the authority of the elders and a shared understanding of the situation. Each season had its own clearly defined economic task. Fall was the period of the most intensive work to provide for the camp. It was then that the main food supply was gathered, which was intended to feed hundreds of people. Starting the fall campaign too early led to the rapid spoilage of food. A late start risked encountering the first severe frosts and setbacks. An understanding of natural cycles was passed down through generations based on long-term observations. This knowledge formed the basis for survival in the harsh conditions of the continental climate. People knew how to interpret changes in the wind, the condition of the grasses, and the water levels in the rivers. Each sign served as a signal to begin or complete a specific stage of work. The system worked flawlessly as long as all members of the community strictly followed the rules. The Great Plains imposed its own harsh conditions of existence. The boundless expanses demanded incredible coordination among the entire group. Acting on one's own initiative was equated with betraying the tribe's interests. Any step taken outside the established timeframes was viewed as a threat to collective safety. Survival depended on the synchronized actions of every participant in the process. This strict regimen can be compared to a modern production cycle. Stopping the assembly line at the wrong moment leads to losses for the entire enterprise. Similarly, here, a deviation from the schedule meant an inevitable shortage in the future. The elders acted as chief managers, overseeing this complex process. Their decisions were based on many years of experience in successfully managing resources. The Lakota social structure ensured strict adherence to these norms. Special societies within the tribe maintained order and punished violators. This control was not merely a formality, but a vital tool for the survival of the community. An understanding of this responsibility was instilled in people from a very early age. Life on the plains demanded the highest level of awareness and discipline. Seasonal law became the foundation of the indigenous people's long-term prosperity. It allowed them not only to survive, but also to create a rich material culture. Without this strict calendar, it would have been impossible to maintain large permanent camps. Do you agree with this? Please share your thoughts on this topic in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to our channel. I'm going to reveal the best-kept secret of survival on the Great Plains. The second unshakable rule was a strict ban on hunting young animals. This rule protected the renewability of the tribe's primary food source. Killing the young meant a direct reduction in the herd's size the following year. Such wastefulness was considered the greatest crime against future generations. The Lakota fully understood the principles of natural population growth. They realized that to ensure a stable yield, they needed to preserve their productive capital. Young animals represented precisely this vital capital of the prairies. Taking them now meant depriving themselves of the opportunity to obtain 3 times as many offspring. This concept lies at the heart of any modern sustainable agriculture. Scouts could unerringly determine the composition and age of any group of animals. Before taking action, they conducted a thorough assessment of available resources. They avoided groups consisting primarily of the younger generation. Their targets were always limited to those who had already contributed to the population's growth. Such a selective approach required a high level of professionalism. The process of selecting a target was complex and required immense patience. Groups could spend hours observing the herd's movements, waiting for the right moment. Choosing the wrong target could lead to panic and the squandering of all resources. Experienced leaders directed the group's efforts with mathematical precision. Their task was to minimize damage to nature. Restrictions applied not only to age, but also to reproductive status. Hunting females during certain periods was also strictly prohibited. Protecting the breeding population ensured the recovery of the group's numbers. This law was observed even during periods of acute food shortages in the camp. For the sake of long-term survival, people were willing to endure temporary hardships. Anyone who violated this rule was subjected to severe public censure. Their actions were viewed as stealing food from their own descendants. No excuses based on inexperience or accident were accepted. Such a person's reputation would plummet, and they would lose the trust of the community. In the close-knit community, this was a very severe ordeal. The Lakota economic model was based on respect for balance. They took exactly as much as nature could painlessly replenish. This principle allowed them to live on the same land for centuries without depleting it. The modern world is only now beginning to realize the importance of this approach. Indigenous peoples practiced these methods as their sole means of survival. Even in times of abundance, the rule of preserving the young remained in force. The apparent wealth of the prairies never served as a reason for recklessness. People remembered stories of times when resources suddenly vanished. This genetic memory compelled them to be extremely cautious and frugal. The wisdom of the elders served as a reliable shield against human greed. Teaching this rule began at an early age through oral traditions. The stories conveyed knowledge about the consequences of disrupting the natural balance. Each generation grew up with a deep understanding of its role in the ecosystem. The responsibility for preserving the herds rested with every member of the tribe. This fostered a unique culture of sustainable stewardship of nature. The system worked perfectly, ensuring a constant flow of life-giving energy. The camp thrived thanks to the strict discipline and foresight of its leaders. Do you think modern societies are capable of the same strict self-restraint for the sake of future generations? In the next chapter, you'll learn why they never took more than they could carry. Watch the video until the end to find out the answer to this question. What I'm about to show you is banned in 12 countries as a destructive truth. The third rule stated, never extract more than the camp is capable of processing. It was a law of absolute efficiency and zero waste. Any surplus left behind meant a waste of precious natural and human energy. The system required the utilization of absolutely every part of the resource obtained. On the Great Plains, there was no such thing as trash or waste. All materials found a use in daily life, construction or clothing production. Hides were turned into sturdy dwellings capable of withstanding hurricane-force winds. Tendons became the strongest threads for sewing and crafting tools. This approach ruled out the senseless accumulation of unused stockpiles. The scale of harvesting always strictly corresponded to the number of workers in the camp. Leaders assessed in advance the community's capacity to process the harvest quickly. On warm days, the harvesting process required incredible speed to prevent spoilage. Every member of the tribe had a clearly defined role in this chain. If there were not enough workers, the volume of resources harvested was immediately reduced. Indigenous peoples perfected the process of food preservation. Meat was dried in the sun and wind, turning it into light and nutritious slices. The resulting product could be stored for years without losing its properties. This technology made it possible to build up strategic reserves in preparation for harsh winters. But creating such reserves required a tremendous amount of time and effort. Limits on harvesting prevented the participants themselves from becoming exhausted. Continuous processing work quickly wore people down physically. Fatigue could lead to mistakes, a loss of vigilance, and the spoilage of valuable materials. Therefore, camp leaders strictly maintained a balance between work and rest. Quality was always valued, far above mindless quantity. Greed was considered not merely a vice, but a threat to survival. A person who tried to take more than their share demonstrated foolishness and selfishness. They created a problem for the entire camp, which could not handle the surplus. Such actions were harshly criticized at tribal meetings. Public opinion was the most powerful regulator of economic behavior. Lakota history records instances where deviating from this rule led to disaster. Temporary abundance would sometimes cloud the judgment of young and inexperienced leaders. They would exceed the limits, leaving some resources to rot in the open. As punishment, nature would often deprive them of good fortune for several years afterward. These lessons were carefully preserved in the oral tradition as a warning. The practice of zero waste demanded the highest level of craftsmanship from all residents. The women of the tribe possessed unique techniques for tanning and curing hides. They used complex recipes based on natural ingredients. This work required a deep understanding of the chemistry involved and incredible patience. Their labor provided the camp with warmth and protection during the harshest frosts. Every item in the camp was the result of this zero-waste production. Tools, tableware, and elements of the dwelling. Everything was created from renewable materials. The community functioned as a highly efficient, self-contained economic system. Dependence on external supplies was minimal, which guaranteed independence. This self-sufficiency allowed the tribes to successfully withstand any hardships. The law of consumption restriction became the foundation of ecological balance. It proves that indigenous peoples possessed a profound understanding of economics. Their methods of resource management surpassed many modern models. If you enjoy learning the truth about the complex culture of the Great Plains, be sure to like this video. Your support helps us create more unique and high-quality content. What if I showed you a time machine that could transport us to a society of perfect equality? The fourth rule of the Great Plains concerned the strict distribution of harvested resources. The spoils never belonged exclusively to the person who obtained them. They were considered common property, guaranteeing the survival of the entire community. This law prevented anyone from going hungry within a successful and strong camp. The distribution mechanism was complex and took into account the status of each community member. The most vulnerable, the elderly and widows, were provided with food first. Only then were resources distributed among the other families in the camp. Those who had directly obtained the food often received their share last. This fostered incredible humility and a sense of responsibility toward one's people. The barter economy created the strongest social bonds within the tribe. A person who generously shared their successes attained high social status. Accumulating material wealth for personal gain made no sense. True wealth was measured by the number of people you were able to help. This philosophy was fundamentally different from the European system of private property. Refusal to share was viewed as the gravest crime against society. Hoarding resources was equated with an attempt to murder one's own tribespeople. Such a person was immediately expelled from the camp, with no right to return. Surviving alone in the harsh conditions of the prairies was practically impossible. Therefore, expulsion effectively meant certain and swift death for the offender. The distribution system functioned as a reliable safety net for everyone. In the event of illness or injury, a person knew that their family would not be left without food. The community assumed responsibility for providing for those who were temporarily unable to work. This gave people confidence in the future and reduced their anxiety. Mutual aid was the main foundation of the entire tribe's psychological stability. Special rules applied during large-scale collective food-gathering expeditions. Those in charge of the process carefully ensured that no one was shortchanged. All resources obtained were brought to the center of the camp for public accounting. The distribution process took place openly and was supervised by the community elders. Such transparency ruled out any conflicts or suspicions of injustice. This approach fostered a society free of internal class conflicts. In the camp, there were no rich or poor in the economic sense we are accustomed to. Differences concerned only the level of respect a person had earned through their deeds. Tribal leaders were often the poorest people in material terms. They gave away all their possessions to ensure the well-being of their people. The tradition of generosity was upheld through special ceremonies and festivals of giving. At these events, people publicly exchanged valuable items and provisions with one another. This strengthened economic ties between different families and even entire tribes. The gift exchange system replaced the market-based relationships we are accustomed to. It functioned flawlessly across the vast territories of the North American continent. The law of distribution helped indigenous peoples survive the most difficult times. When resources ran low, the community simply reduced consumption evenly. No one tried to save themselves at the expense of their neighbor's demise or weakness. The collective mind always prevailed over individual instincts of self-preservation. It was a society built on the principles of absolute solidarity. The Lakota's social welfare mechanisms deserve in-depth study. They prove that a successful economy can be built on caring for one's neighbors. Could you give up personal property for the sake of your entire city's survival? In the next chapter, you'll learn why even a successful process ended with a mandatory ritual. Read to the end to understand how the philosophy of respect transformed reality. The fifth rule required a mandatory expression of gratitude to the harvested resource. For the Native Americans of the Great Plains, nature was not a soulless repository of materials. It was perceived as a living organism, composed of equal partners. Life given up to sustain people demanded the deepest respect. The ritual of Thanksgiving was not merely a tradition, but an important psychological act. Every successful foray concluded with a brief but meaningful ceremony of gratitude. A person would address the spirit of nature, explaining the necessity of his action. He would emphasize that the resource was taken solely for the survival of his family. This process helped maintain inner harmony and prevented one from becoming a soulless consumer. Respect for the source of life fostered a proper attitude toward the surrounding world. A lack of gratitude was considered a sign of arrogance and a failure to understand the laws of the world. It was believed that nature could turn its back on anyone who displayed such pride. Success in one's endeavors was viewed not as a personal achievement, but as a gift from above. The loss of this gift meant inevitable disaster for the entire settlement. Therefore, the elders strictly monitored adherence to moral standards within the camp. A philosophy of respect permeated all aspects of Lakota material culture. Objects made from natural materials were adorned with intricate patterns. Each pattern conveyed information about the connection between humans and their surroundings. The labor invested in the decoration was also a form of expressing gratitude. The beauty of everyday objects reflected the inner state of harmony within the entire society. Rituals helped people cope with the emotional strain of their harsh way of life. Life on the plains demanded constant exertion and concentration. The practice of mindfulness through gratitude alleviated psychological pressure. It reminded everyone of their place within a vast and complex ecosystem. People did not feel like lone fighters against the elements. They were part of them. This value system was passed down to children through the personal example of adults. The younger generation witnessed how respectfully the elders treated food. Not a single morsel was thrown away needlessly, nor was any action taken in vain. The cultivation of respect began with a child's very first steps on the ground of the camp. This is how the well-rounded and responsible character of a future defender of the community was formed. During the winter encampments, when life came to a standstill, these rituals became more elaborate. People gathered together in large teepees to reflect on the past year. They gave thanks to nature for the provisions that had allowed them to survive the cold. Long stories reinforced the collective memory and brought the community even closer together. Winter was a time of spiritual renewal and preparation for a new cycle. The practice of giving thanks also had practical economic significance for the tribe. It prevented people from becoming complacent and taking abundance for granted. A constant awareness of the value of resources encouraged their careful use. Thrift became a natural consequence of a deep respect for nature's work. This mechanism of self-control worked more effectively than any external prohibitions. The concept of gratitude united various tribes into a single cultural community. Despite language barriers, the basic philosophy of their relationship with the world was similar. This made it possible to establish trade and diplomatic ties across vast territories. Shared values served as a solid foundation for the peaceful coexistence of neighbors. Respect for nature automatically translated into respect for other people. The rationality of these customs is confirmed by centuries of successful survival on the prairies. Without a complex system of moral checks and balances, society would have quickly deteriorated. Spiritual practice was inseparable from the community's daily economic activities. It cemented the foundation upon which the entire civilization of the Great Plains stood. It was a perfect symbiosis of material pragmatism and profound philosophy. The hidden truth that everyone keeps quiet about lies in the strictness of these rules. What happened when someone decided to break the laws established over centuries? History has preserved a legend about a man who disregarded the rule of the proper season. His decision set off a chain reaction of catastrophic events for the entire settlement. This incident became the most terrifying lesson in the history of one of the northern camps. That winter was particularly harsh, with endless icy winds. Food supplies were dwindling faster than usual, and tension began to mount in the camp. A group of young people decided not to wait for spring and set out in search of provisions. They ignored the elders' explicit prohibition, hoping for quick and easy luck. Their overconfidence was driven by fear, but it led to tragedy. Upon venturing beyond the protected valley, they disturbed the tranquility of nature at rest. Their clumsy movements in the deep snow scared away the remaining wintering herds. The resources that were supposed to form the basis of the spring recovery migrated far to the north. The area around the camp turned into a completely empty, lifeless, icy desert. The young people returned empty-handed, having wasted their last reserves of strength. The consequences of this rash decision became apparent within just a few weeks. The arrival of spring did not bring the expected return of vital resources to the valley. The usual migration routes had been disrupted, and the land remained barren. The camp found itself trapped without food at the very beginning of the warm season. There was no backup plan, as the system had always functioned without a hitch. A period of severe austerity began, during which rations were cut to the absolute minimum. People were forced to dip into their most sacred reserves, including the seed bank. Physical exhaustion led to a sharp decline in the entire community's ability to work. Hunters no longer had the strength to travel long distances on reconnaissance missions. The camp was slowly but surely sinking into a state of complete economic disaster. The elders made the difficult decision to divide the community into smaller groups. It was the only chance to increase the likelihood of survival for at least some of the people. The vast and prosperous camp broke up into several dozen vulnerable groups. Each group set off in its own direction, hoping to find untouched territories. Many families were separated forever, never to meet again after that spring. Lawbreakers faced the harshest punishment possible. They were expelled from the tribe and deprived of any support from their kin. Their names were permanently erased from oral history and consigned to oblivion. This was considered worse than death, as a person lost their connection to their ancestors. The severity of the punishment was directly proportional to the scale of the damage they had caused. But time went down in legend as the year of the empty plains. It took many decades to restore the community's population and former prosperity. This crisis changed the structure of resource management in many neighboring tribes. Enforcement of the laws became even stricter and more uncompromising. The cost of a mistake had been proven in practice, and no one wanted to repeat it. History became an essential part of the education of every new generation. Children were given detailed explanations of how a single action had brought down the entire system. They understood that rules were not created to restrict freedom, but to protect. Discipline came to be seen as the highest expression of love for one's people. The tragedy ultimately served to strengthen the internal cohesion of all future camps. This example illustrates the incredible vulnerability of human beings to the laws of nature. Could you take responsibility for the fate of an entire settlement? In the next chapter, you'll learn exactly what happened to the camp's ecosystem under conditions of scarcity. Watch until the end to see the anatomy of survival in extreme conditions. The infrastructure of a typical indigenous camp was a complex mechanism. In times of plenty, this mechanism ran like a well-oiled machine. Hundreds of tipis stood in neat circles, forming a sheltered inner space. Smoke from the campfires rose evenly, a sign of each family's well-being. But when resource scarcity crept into the system, all processes began to change rapidly. The first sign of an impending threat was a change in the settlement's rhythm of life. The familiar noise of active work, processing materials and preparing food, disappeared. Women stopped hanging new supplies on the special drying racks. The camp sank into an anxious, lingering silence as it awaited news from the scouts. People tried to move as little as possible to conserve their precious inner energy. Conservation efforts extended not only to food, but also to fuel for heating dwellings. Fires were kept to a minimum, providing only a dim light and meager warmth. During severe frosts, several families would gather together in a single, larger tipi. This allowed them to make the most efficient use of their remaining stockpiles of firewood and kindling. The space became more crowded, blurring the boundaries between individual households for the sake of collective survival. Changes in the diet immediately affected the daily activities of the entire community. Traditional foods were replaced by emergency substitutes that required complex heat treatment. They resorted to eating specific types of roots, moss, and even boiled pieces of old leather. These foods gave the illusion of satiety, but could not provide the body with the necessary energy. Physical activity levels dropped to critically low levels. Guarding the camp during such periods required incredible willpower. Lookouts on the hills were required to maintain maximum concentration despite their exhaustion. The weakened camp became an attractive target for any ill wishers or aggressive neighbors. The community's safety always remained a priority, for which the last reserves were spent. Guard shifts were rotated more frequently so that people could rest at least a little while in the warmth. During this period of exhaustion, the leader's role shifted from managing resources to managing morale. They went from tent to tent, encouraging people with conversations and reminding them of past victories. Psychological stability was no less important than having a piece of dried meat. Panic could destroy what little discipline remained and lead to fatal mistakes. The elders' calmness spread throughout the camp, offering hope for a speedy rescue. An inventory of the remaining supplies was conducted daily and with the utmost transparency. Concealing the true state of affairs from the community was considered pointless and dangerous. People needed to understand the scale of the problem in order to assess their capabilities accurately. Every handful of dried berries was distributed according to a strict crisis management plan. The mathematics of survival left no room for emotions or attempts to bargain for a larger share. The dogs, which usually served as draft animals, were also put on a starvation ration. Losing these helpers would make it impossible to move camp quickly in the future. People shared their last rations with the animals, recognizing their strategic value to the tribe. Maintaining mobility was essential to ensuring the camp could reach new territories. The interdependence of humans and their environment was particularly evident at such moments. Decisions to break camp under conditions of exhaustion were made with great caution. The journey required energy that the people had almost none of left. A mistake in route selection could lead to being stranded in a lifeless, icy steppe. Scouts had to provide absolute guarantees that resources were available at the new location. Only when there was 100% certainty would the council give the order to pack up the tipi. The dynamics of a starving camp demonstrated the incredible strength of the Lakota's social bonds. No hardship could compel them to stoop to plundering their own neighbors. A system built on mutual respect withstood the most severe pressures of circumstance. They faced the crisis as a single monolith, bound together by iron discipline. It was precisely this internal architecture of their society that allowed them to triumph over death time and time again. The survival of the entire camp depended directly on the quality of the reconnaissance team's work. These people represented the tribe's elite, possessing phenomenal knowledge of the terrain. Their task was not simply to search for food, but to assess the ecological situation. They functioned as a complex network of sensors, gathering information from vast territories. The community's entire economic strategy for the coming months depended on their findings. A scout had to be able to move across the plains without leaving any traces. Any interference with the natural course of life on the prairies could distort the data being collected. They used the terrain, moving along the beds of dry creeks and rocky ridges. The art of invisibility had been perfected through long years of training. Their presence remained undetected, even by the most cautious inhabitants of the wilderness. Information was gathered from a multitude of indirect clues and the smallest details. The condition of the vegetation, the water level, the direction of the wind, everything mattered. Scouts could determine the amount of available resources simply by studying the tracks on the ground. They assessed the speed of the herd's movement and predicted their route weeks in advance. It was extremely complex analytical work, requiring outstanding intellectual abilities. The detachments operated completely autonomously, venturing many tens of kilometers away from the main camp. They carried only a minimal supply of the most calorie-dense and lightweight provisions. Their equipment was extremely minimalistic, so as not to hinder their movement during long treks. They spent the night without campfires, so that smoke would not give away their presence. The endurance of these people surpassed any modern notions of the limits of human capability. Information was relayed to camp via a system of complex visual signals. The use of mirrors during the day and specific smoke patterns allowed messages to be transmitted instantly. The scouts had an entire vocabulary of code signs to describe the type and quantity of resources they found. This saved time, which was critical for successful planning. The camp received data in real time and could respond quickly to the situation. A scout's mistake could cost the tribe its entire year's supply of food. Overestimating the resources found led to a waste of the entire camp's efforts. Underestimating them meant missing opportunities and failing to secure vital reserves. Therefore, reports were always cross-checked by several independent groups of observers. The accuracy of the information was treated as an absolute priority, since lives depended on it. During the winter, the scouts' work was complicated by extreme weather conditions. Whiteout conditions and hurricane-force winds reduced visibility to just a few meters. Navigating in such conditions relied on intuition, based on a deep knowledge of the micro-topography. The risk of getting lost and freezing to death was incredibly high every single minute. Nevertheless, they continued to fulfill their duty, providing the camp with up-to-date information. Training new personnel for this work took many years. Experienced masters selected the most attentive and patient young men from the tribe. Training included a detailed study of botany, meteorology, and behavioral psychology. An apprentice had to prove his ability to maintain sustained concentration and analytical skills. Only after a series of extremely difficult tests was he allowed to work independently. The social status of the scouts was among the highest in Lakota society. Even the most authoritative chiefs and council elders heeded their advice. They shaped the strategic vision for the settlement's development and determined the directions of migration. Their knowledge was the primary intellectual capital of the indigenous peoples of North America. Without their work, the Great Plains would have remained an impassable and deadly desert. The effectiveness of this information-gathering system astonished the first European explorers. The indigenous peoples knew absolutely everything about the movements of objects within their territory. Their information network operated flawlessly across an area of thousands of square kilometers. This demonstrates the highest level of organization in their society and the depth of their understanding of the environment. Intelligence was the very foundation upon which the entire economy of survival was built. Successful survival during the winter depended on food preservation techniques. Summer and fall supplies had to be preserved amid drastic temperature fluctuations. Indigenous peoples developed unique methods that rivaled modern long-term storage technologies. The main foodstuff ensuring the camp's survival was the famous pemmican. The process of making it required immense labor and strict adherence to the recipe. The production of pemmican began with the proper preparation of the main raw materials. Lean meat was cut into the thinnest strips and dried until it became as brittle as cardboard. The sun and the constant prairie winds removed all excess moisture from the product. The dried pieces were then ground with stones into a fine, almost dust-like powder. This procedure took many days of continuous, monotonous work by the camp's entire female population. Highly purified melted fat was added to the resulting meat powder. The fat served not only as a source of a tremendous number of calories, but also as an ideal preservative. It cut off oxygen access, preventing any processes of decay or spoilage. Dried berries were often mixed into the blend to improve the flavor and prevent disease. The resulting mixture was thoroughly stirred and cooled until it solidified completely. The finished product was packed into special bags made of thick, untreated leather. The seams were sealed with the same fat, creating a capsule that was completely impervious to moisture. In this form, pemmican could be stored for years without losing its nutritional value. A single bag of this product could provide an adult man with enough energy for an entire month. It was the ideal dry ration, easy to transport and incredibly nutritious. Preservation techniques applied not only to meat but also to plant-based foods. Various roots were dug up, cleaned and dried for long periods. They were woven into long garlands which were hung from the ceiling of the teepee. Smoke from the campfire created an additional protective layer that kept pests away. Plant-based food supplies served as an important source of carbohydrates during the coldest winter months. Water in winter conditions also became a resource that required careful management. Drinking snow led to rapid hypothermia and illness. Therefore, the camp always maintained a supply of water drawn from holes cut in the ice. Storing water in the teepee required the use of special leather water bags. These were placed at an optimal distance from the fire to prevent the water from freezing. Underground storage pits were another important element of the winter economy. In areas with suitable soil, deep pits with narrow openings were dug. The walls of the pits were lined with dry grass and bark to provide thermal insulation. In such caches, supplies were reliably protected from the cold and possible raids by enemies. The locations of the caches were carefully concealed and known only to a select few. Control over the use of winter supplies was the strictest of the year. Pemmican was distributed strictly according to a calculated ration for each person. No requests for an extra portion could alter the established order. This strict rationing ensured that there would be enough food to last exactly until the first spring greens appeared. This mathematics of survival was harsh, but absolutely fair. The winter months transformed the camp into a self-sufficient outpost, cut off from the outside world. The success of the wintering depended entirely on the quality of the work done in the summer and fall. Any flaw in the preservation process could prove fatal for an entire family. Therefore, the quality of production was monitored at every stage by the most experienced women. Their labor was the true guarantee of the tribe's continued existence. The economics of food preservation demonstrate the high level of development of the material culture of the prairies. Their knowledge of the chemical processes and properties of materials was remarkably precise. They created products that are still used today by expeditions and armies around the world. The Lakota's expertise in resource conservation is an invaluable contribution to the world's store of knowledge. Winter was a time of trials, but they were always prepared for it. How was order maintained in a society without prisons or a formal police force? The foundation of discipline was the Council of Elders and special warrior societies. Camp management was based on authority, deep respect, and the power of tradition. The laws of hunting and survival were not merely rules, but a sacred duty for everyone. Mechanisms of enforcement operated through social pressure and the fear of public censure. War societies, such as the Akichita among the Lakota, served as the executive branch. Their members were chosen from among the most respected, strongest, and most just men. During periods of large-scale gathering, they were granted absolute authority over the entire camp. They monitored every move at the encampment, quelling any attempts at unauthorized action. Their authority was unquestionable, and arguing with them was considered the height of folly. Punishments for minor offenses were quite original and effective. If a person violated the rules, his property could be publicly cut to pieces or destroyed. The offender's belongings might be cut to shreds right before the eyes of the entire settlement. However, once a person acknowledged their guilt, the community helped them restore what had been lost. This demonstrated that the punishment was intended not to destroy, but to educate. The Council of Elders served as the supreme court and the main decision-making body. It was composed of people whose wisdom had been proven by decades of impeccable conduct. They did not make hasty decisions, discussing each issue in depth and from all angles. Sessions could last for days until all participants reached complete consensus. This approach ruled out mistakes caused by momentary emotions or personal animosity. The teaching of social norms never ceased for a single day. Evening stories told around the campfire always contained a hidden moral or a set of rules. The heroes of these tales were those who sacrificed themselves to uphold the tribe's laws. The anti-heroes were selfish individuals whose greed led to disasters and the deaths of their comrades. The cultural code shaped people's consciousness in such a way that crime seemed unthinkable. The most important factor in maintaining discipline was the complete lack of anonymity in the camp. Everyone knew one another, and it was physically impossible to hide a dishonorable act. Living under the watchful eyes of hundreds of people forced one to constantly monitor one's behavior. A reputation was built over years of hard work, but it could be lost in a single day. The fear of disgrace was the most powerful incentive to obey all 5 unwritten laws. The interdependence of community members was the best guarantee of order. Everyone understood that their life depended directly on the actions of their neighbor in the camp. If a neighbor made a mistake, everyone would have to pay the price together. Therefore, people kept an eye on one another, nipping violations in the bud. It was a system of mutual responsibility, but one based not on fear, but on common sense. Rights and responsibilities were clearly distributed among all participants in the process. No one could shift their share of the work onto another without good reason. The labor was hard, but it was perceived as a natural part of human existence. Idleness was condemned and considered a sign of spiritual illness or mental weakness. Universal participation in camp life made every person significant and indispensable. Resource management would have been impossible without this strict social structure. The 5 rules of the Lakota would have been empty words without mechanisms to actually enforce them. Discipline transformed a crowd of people into a unified, highly organized, and effective organism. This organism could function successfully under conditions where a modern person would perish within a week. The wisdom of their laws has withstood the harshest test, the test of time and nature. The culture of the Great Plains has left us a unique example of how to build a sustainable society. Their legal system was simple, understandable to everyone, and incredibly effective in practice. It was based on a deep understanding of human psychology and the laws of ecology. Studying their experience allows us to take a fresh look at our modern economic models. Discipline, responsibility, and respect. These are the true secrets of their centuries-long survival. We've seen that the indigenous people's system of survival wasn't a set of superstitions, but a brilliant economic system. Please suggest topics in the comments for future videos that you'd like to see on our channel. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new historical explorations.